New images show Marines aboard the USS Fort Lauderdale, escorted by the destroyer Stockdale transiting offshore, a mere 7 miles from Venezuela. Those Marines just wrapped up a week of training here in Trinidad, part of the show of force known as Operation Southern Spear in the Caribbean. Today, the State Department designated a cartel linked to Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro as a foreign terrorist organization, with the administration accusing Maduro and his generals of enriching themselves in the drug trade.
If the drug cartels go out of business, so does the Maduro regime.
The administration says the new designation opens up the cartel to airstrikes, claiming the same legal authority used to destroy suspected drug boats. Should President Trump give the green light, there is plenty of firepower in the Caribbean. This newly released photo aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford shows an electronic warfare jet used to jam enemy radar and destroy surface-to-air missile sites. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin Kane, has arrived in Puerto Rico to receive an operational update on Southern Spear, as lawmakers from both sides remain skeptical of the administration's plans.
What lies ahead could be worse than what we have now.
Historically, the United States' intervention in Central America or South America has not always rolled out the way we'd hope.
President Trump says he wants to speak with Maduro, who appeared at a rally Friday calling for dialogue, not conflict.
Not another war!
After the FAA warned airliners to avoid flying over Venezuela, some foreign carriers have canceled flights to Caracas. Tonight, F-18 Super Hornets from the USS Gerald R. Ford have linked up with a B-52 bomber to fly another show-of-force mission off the coast of Venezuela. Brett?
Lucas Thomason, not far from that coast. Lucas, thanks.
Trump administration is reportedly set to launch a new phase of operations against Venezuela in the coming days, apparently aiming to overthrow dictator Nicolás Maduro.
It comes as the U.S. ramps up its military strikes against the alleged drug boats in the Caribbean.
Lucas Tomlinson is in Trinidad and Tobago and joins us now with details. Good morning, Lucas.
Tobago.
Tobago.
Tomato.
Or the island of Trinidad. That works, too. Good morning, Charlie, Ainsley, and Brian. New warnings from the FAA have canceled several flights from several foreign carriers to Venezuela after American F-18 Super Hornets, spy planes, and bombers were seen flying off the coast. And now, Reuters out with a new report saying covert action could begin soon inside Venezuela. This comes after a month after President Trump authorized the CIA to conduct those operations. And here's from Reuters. Two of the U.S. officials said covert operations would likely be the first part of the new action against Maduro. The options under consideration include attempting to overthrow Maduro. Now, Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro has remained defiant. Yesterday was his birthday. Late last week, he attended a public rally with college students, attendance likely mandatory. Rachel Campos-Duffy interviewed Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who, like Trump, says Maduro's days are numbered.
I completely trust the strategy President Trump is developing and his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. They know very well with whom they're dealing with. I believe that Maduro will get a very clear picture of what are his options and what's the future for Venezuela. Maduro started this war. President Trump is ending this war.
Should President Trump order strikes against the Maduro regime, there's plenty of firepower in the Caribbean to do it, with about 30% of all deployed American warships, including the aircraft carrier Gerald R. Ford, now on station. There are over 200 Tomahawk cruise missiles in theater aboard destroyers and U.S. Marines aboard the USS Iwo Jima and other amphibs in the Ready Group. Now, ahead of Thanksgiving, the U.S. military's top officer, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Raisin Kane, arrived in Puerto Rico yesterday to meet the forces who are part of Operation Southern Spear. So with General Kane in the region, we'll have to see if Secretary Hegseth follows suit ahead of Thanksgiving. And one thing officials have said is some of this buildup in the Caribbean goes beyond the Maduro regime. It's about getting Russia, China, and Iran out of the Western Hemisphere, guys.
And how is that not in our national interest? Appreciate it. Thanks so much, Lucas.
A lot of firepower.
And look, we can't spend a lot of time on this. There's so many big stories today. But just check out the Wall Street Journal. They talk about the headline is South America is turning more right-wing and getting Trumpier. What they're doing is more and more are electing, from Chile to what we saw in Bolivia, more electing Panama, electing more and more conservatives. Even the guy in Brazil is in trouble. So it's not healthy to be against the president. What he wants to do is not dominate these countries. He just wants these countries not to be dominated by China, Russia, and Iran.
And with that, let's bring in former Secretary of State and CIA Director Mike Pompeo, a Fox News contributor. Great to have you with us today, Mike. Let's start with the Caribbean, and then we'll move to Ukraine, if I may. The presence of General Kane in the area, the ramp up of our forces in the area, where do you think this is going? And do you believe that the White House, that President Trump wants to see Maduro toppled?
Well, Martha, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on. The fact that Mr. Kane is there is telling. I'm glad he's going there to thank the troops. I'm confident he's going there for more than that, not only to send a message, but to listen and to learn about what capabilities we have and what we can deploy and how successful it might be. I do think that this administration understands that this is all part of a larger puzzle, right? The Venezuelans, supported by the Cubans, the Russians, and the Chinese now in our own neighborhood. And getting rid of Maduro gives the Venezuelan people a shot and keeps us safer. So I think that this administration is very serious about continuing to ratchet up the pressure on the regime such that the Venezuelan people get an opportunity to have a leadership that can actually protect them and give them a shot at prosperity.
What do you think the chances are of Maduro being toppled? Because President Obama also wanted to see Maduro toppled, and he's still there.
Yeah, well, we took a shot at it in the first Trump administration too, Martha. You'll recall that as we were working along that to put pressure on Maduro and his regime. We were not successful at giving the Venezuelans what they needed. This time they've been willing to do more. We never know how these end. When you least expect these things, sometimes they happen. And I think that the leadership in Venezuela outside of Maduro now can see that there is a window, and maybe with enough opportunity and enough pressure, we can deliver that outcome. It would be a really good thing for the people of the region, in addition to the people here in America.
All right. Secretary Pompeo, let's take a look at the map of Ukraine and the area that Russia has successfully taken over, and the area that they might gain some additional territory in as we look at this 28-point deal. When you read this deal, the initial deal, and we know it's evolving, what went through your mind, and would you have said yes to it if you were Zelensky?
So when I read it, I took two things on board. One is this is an opening salvo. This was not going to be the final deal. Had I been President Zelensky, I suppose I would have rejected it, just as he clearly has. But I would also seen it as the fact that my country's at an inflection point. We've been fighting this war for a long time. Maybe we can build off of this to get to something that's acceptable. And I think Zelensky, and frankly, I think for Secretary Rubio in America, we're going to land in the same place. One, we don't trust a single thing Vladimir Putin signs, right? No matter what he signs, it's not particularly meaningful. This will be hard-powered deterrence that will have to be put in place. And you can see the security guarantee starting to take shape that might achieve that. Then second, Ukraine has to have independence, both political and military, the capability to continue to defend itself in the years ahead. If they can get a model, an agreement that leads that same place, the fact that we may have to accept that the Russians will continue to hold this ground for a while, the ground that they took by aggression, the evil war that they started, it may be that is an outcome that is a maximalist outcome for Ukraine and for Europe and, frankly, for the United States that can be achievable today.
I mean, pretty much everything that has been presented to Russia, they've shot down, and they're losing 20,000 people a month, which is what they lost in the entire Afghanistan war. What do you think about how much pressure Putin is under? We know he doesn't really appear to care too much about how many people he loses, at least up until now. But do you think he's at a point where he might be willing to make some sort of deal to end this thing, at least for now?
Martha, I've seen no evidence of that. Apparently, he was prepared to take that 28-point deal where he was given some land he hasn't even been able to take. Yeah. That's perhaps not surprising. It wouldn't surprise me if he would have rejected that and asked for more again. I haven't seen any evidence that he's prepared to lay down his weapons. We should all keep in mind, President Zelensky agreed to a ceasefire that President Trump wanted months ago, and it was Putin who rejected that and then went to Anchorage and basically stiffed the Western world. So I haven't seen any evidence that Putin's prepared to do that. I don't think we have remotely put enough pressure on him. I don't think the Biden administration did. I don't think this administration has done enough. The more we talk about putting pressure on Putin, the more likely it is that he will say, okay, that's enough, and finally get us the peace that every single person wants.
Secretary Pompeo, thank you very much, and good Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. Thank you, sir.
Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family as well, Martha.
Thank you very much, Mike.
So joining me now to explain why Americans should care about what the Trump administration might be doing in Venezuela, let's head over to the head of the Future of Venezuela Initiative at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Ryan Berg. Ryan, thanks for being with us here today. First, do you think that's what's happening? Are we embarking on regime change in Venezuela?
Good afternoon, Will. It's great to be with you. Thanks very much for having me on. Certainly, I think that the nature of this mission in the Southern Caribbean seems to be evolving. Bringing the USS Gerald R. Ford, the carrier strike group that's just arrived last week, to the Southern Caribbean seems to me to be one of those moments where we've crossed a Rubicon, Will. You don't bring that kind of equipment into the region unless you're intent on using it. It's expensive. It costs about $6 million a day. Had to move it across the Atlantic. There are options that are on the table now for the president, which involve strikes against Venezuela, which he may well greenlight in the coming weeks. So this is no joke. These are real options that are on the table. That said, Will, I will say that I think the president is trying to do this in a way that is as bloodless and as easy as possible. He says he has something that he wants to talk to Maduro about. I imagine that's the moment, Will, for the ultimatum. Now is your time to go. You can negotiate your exit, and that's your option.
All right, to the point of the strike carrier group, the aircraft carrier headed to the coast of Venezuela, it also seems unnecessary to battle drug boats or drug cartels. So it does seem to indicate something much bigger is brewing in Venezuela. Now, maybe there is a way to thread the needle, as you mentioned. Maybe there's a conversation to be had. But if there is not, or if Maduro does what he has done for quite some time and rejects that opportunity, what happens? What do we do? Do you anticipate? Is this drones? Is this aerial strikes? Is this troops on the ground in Venezuela?
Well, the administration says we're entering the next phase. So they've, as you outlined in your intro, they've designated the Cartel de los Soles as a foreign terrorist organization. They've said that the CIA is going to be active in the covert space, conducting psychological operations as well. There were news stories rather about potential leaflet droppings that could be coming soon. But if these things fail to dislodge Maduro, there's a real chance here that the United States will greenlight strikes against targets in Venezuela. And the question at that point, will be, are these targets that are purely aimed at some of those criminal organizations that we know operate out of Venezuela, or are they targets at the nexus of the state criminal relationship, which we also know exists in Venezuela? If they're the latter targets, those are the types of targets that have a real chance at creating a kind of change of regime in Venezuela.
Okay, Ryan, I'd love for you now to explain to me. I would imagine, and it's no insult to the viewer or to the average American, but I don't know that they could name the leader of Venezuela. Perhaps that Nicolás Maduro's name is out there enough that everyone is now familiar. But I think it's very fair for the American public to think, why is this important to America? That's not to reject the idea that it is important, and it's certainly not a defense of Venezuela. But when we're talking about marshaling American forces, American money, potentially danger to Americans, why is it important for us to change Venezuela?
Well, I think that this cuts to the heart of President Trump's agenda in Latin America. The priorities, as I see it, are threefold. First, migration. Second, drugs. And third, China, and to a lesser extent, Russia. In Venezuela, you have all three of those issues present, and all three of those issues present in a major way. I think that's why the focus has been so intently on Maduro, the opportunities that he provides for China and Russia to project power just 600 miles from the U.S. homeland, the regime's participation in drug trafficking, which kills Americans, and the 8 million Venezuelans who have left that country because of ruinous economic policies. I think this hits on all of the issues that the president cares so much about, and why he, frankly, is refocusing U.S. foreign policy on the Americas, because it matters to everyday Americans what happens in our shared neighborhood.
Well, let's just one more quick follow-up question on the shared neighborhood. Again, not a rejection of the answer, but asking for clarification for everyone. Why should it be so important to Americans to ensure, let's just take number 3, that there is no Chinese presence in the Western Hemisphere?
Well, China is not only our greatest economic competitor, but it's also undermining opportunities for the United States to build supply chain security, for example. It's undermining the ability of the United States to wean itself off of Chinese Communist Party control of certain critical industries that we need to be able to prosper and thrive. And we've seen that in the last couple of weeks and months, Will, the Chinese using economic coercion to undermine the American economy and to negotiate with the president. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a friendly set of countries in the Americas where we could build joint prosperity together and where economic coercion wasn't a daily tool in the toolkit of these countries to use against the United States? I think that's the president's overall message and agenda here, is trying to build a hemisphere where the United States has more influence and more opportunities, and we can enjoy prosperity together. It can't be done with folks like Nicolás Maduro in our shared neighborhood.
Of course, it would be nice. But that word build carries with it a cost-benefit analysis, and one that needs to be part of a continued conversation. What is the cost-benefit analysis? What will it cost us? Not just in treasure, but in energy, in effort, in focus, taking away from issues here at home as well. But what will it cost us for the potential benefit of ensuring China, Russia, drug cartels are not in control in Venezuela? And I hope we can continue that conversation. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks very much, Will.
Top U.S. military leaders slated to visit Puerto Rico today to meet with troops and express gratitude for their dedicated work in the America First missions across the Caribbean.
This visit comes as the U.S. is reportedly getting ready to ramp up a new phase in operations against Nicolás Maduro's regime in Venezuela. The U.S. so far has taken out a total of 21 suspected drug boats in September, killing at least 82 narco-terrorists in the process.
Joining us now, former Navy captain and senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Brent Sadler. Sir, great to see you as always. Describe what the scope and timing of these potential operations with regard to Venezuela could be.
Yeah, so thanks for having me on this morning. The ongoing attacks against these narcotics trafficking vessels working for a host of drug cartels based largely out of Maduro's Venezuela continue to apply pressure on where and how these cartels survive, their business model. But it's going to take quite a while still. There's quite a number of these vessels, and there's about a $690 billion trade just in cocaine that goes from the south to the north to the U.S. markets. And that doesn't really include that which going over to Europe as well. So we're still into what looks like to be a months-long assault against these drug cartels.
As for the mission, the administration says, of course, that this is all about preventing drugs from entering the country. But we're taking a much different tactic when it comes to Venezuela as opposed to countries like China and Mexico. When it comes to that goal of why this is taking place, what do you believe that is?
Well, I think the goal, and if you look at the scope of the attacks, they've been attacking drug smuggling vessels. Many of them have been observed for many years by groups like the Joint Interagency Task Force South and partner nations that have been trying to interdict these drug runners for years, decades actually, going back to the late 80s. But when those attacks extended to the Pacific, it was clear they're going after the drug cartels' bottom line, the ability to move product to market and make money. It's less about directly attacking the Maduro regime. Of course, the Maduro regime survives because of the largesse and the muscle of these drug cartels. So if the drug cartels go out of business, so does the Maduro regime.
Meantime, all eyes on Ukraine, specifically what is happening in Europe right now to try to lead to peace in Ukraine. Secretary of State Marco Rubio touting his progress and optimism on the peace deal between Russia and Ukraine after the Geneva talks held over the weekend. But they got a lot of bipartisan criticism. Take a listen.
So I'm not going to speculate or go into the details of any of the specific items in the latest version of the proposal because, frankly, by tomorrow or the next day, that may have evolved and changed further. And but I can tell you, I guess, that I feel very optimistic that we can get something done here because we made a tremendous amount of progress today.
This initial plan would be a total capitulation by Ukraine. I think it would go down, frankly, as a historically bad deal.
I would not advise Ukraine to sign this. They can't sign an agreement like the Budapest and then allow Russia to invade again.
Yeah, and to be abundantly clear, a lot of that bipartisan criticism that we saw on the Sunday shows came before Marco Rubio made that announcement there. But looking ahead, at the end of the day, this all comes back to securing an agreement that Russia actually sticks to. Do you anticipate that such an agreement exists, Brent?
Well, there's no agreement right now that exists because they're still in the phase of negotiating it. And many of the comments, I think, are a bit premature because we don't know the full details. Ukraine has just had their round of looking at it and tweaking on it. The Russians are next, so there's going to be more changes. The key metric to look at is, can a sustainable peace be delivered through the mechanism of the ceasefire? And it's going to require both armed forces stepping back about no less than 20 kilometers from each other from what is today the effective front line or the line of control. But that line of control that gets frozen has to be one that if either side decides to reinitiate hostilities, the risk and the cost on them is so high that they'll actually refrain from doing it. So there will be adjustments in that front line to ensure that's the case. Many of the other details are still fluid and moving, so probably best to see what comes out in the coming days. But the only thing that hasn't been mentioned in any of these discussions and in the drafts that have been leaked is what happens in the Black Sea. And I think that's a place where the Russians could be very vulnerable and could be a way in which to check any future aggression. It's also the only way that Ukraine remains economically independent.
Yeah, and Secretary Rubio sounded extremely pleased with how these talks went yesterday. He said he wasn't going to release any details because they could change by today or tomorrow, but we eagerly await those new details to come out. Former Navy captain and senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Brent Sadler, we thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.